Welcome everyone to this week's IPLD sync meeting. It's the 8th of March 2021, and as every week we go over the stuff that we've worked on the past week and then discuss any open agenda items we might have. I start with myself, so I'm still on the JavaScript things. It's still the link to the same PR as last week. What I did is I improved again the code for JS IPFS Unix FS. So now it's really using no old style CIDs anymore. And now I tried to get it into JS IPFS. And it's also using not what we call JS IPLD, but it's just using the so-called block API, although I'm not sure it's really the IPFS block API, but it's basically just something where you can put bytes and get bytes back. But this is currently all that Unix FS needs and uses. Yeah, so that's a super simple interface, and I hope that also other parts of IPFS can then just use this thing instead of like a full-blown block service or IPLD. And of course, next is to keep integrating it into JS IPFS. I'm almost there. I have about, I don't know, something like six tests that don't run well, and like we have something like, I don't know, like 300 tests or so. So it's like getting there, but no, now they are probably harder to be debugged. And the idea is really that from the IPFS side of things, you still interact with the old CIDs, or basically the CIDs you're used to, and then on the lower levels they get converted, and for example, Unix FS will fully use the new CID stuff, but on the outside surface it will still be the old CIDs. So if you use JS IPFS, it will just work as usual. That's at least like for a start. When we then need to figure out like, is there a performance impact? Do we want to do it like this? And details. But first thing is like, can we actually make things working? This is where I'm still at. Okay, then that's all from me. Next on my list is Danielle.
Cool. So something I mentioned last week is that I've been moving us to the Go codec DACPP package that Rod wrote a while ago, which is the DACPP codec on top of IPLD prime, because some libraries in IPFS and IPLD already use IPLD prime, sort of, but they use a different DACPP codec called Go IPLD prime proto. And they both are kind of compatible, but they can't be used at the same time. So we have to choose one and use that. So the good news is that I converted Go Merkle DAG, Go Car, and Go Graph Sync, which were the only pieces of existing software that used the other codec, which we can't use at the same time. And that all worked fine. They don't have a lot of tests. There was only one test that failed, but I figured I can check that out later because we're not merging code just yet. And what I'm doing now is wrangling all of that together into Go IPFS, because Hannah does have a branch in Go IPFS that switches to the Go Merkle DAG that uses Go IPLD prime. And she has 4 failing tests, but everything else works. So I added my stuff, which is moving everything to Rod's codec, and more stuff fails, and I'm trying to debug that. So yeah, I still don't know what's failing or why. It might be a mistake I've made. It might be something that I misunderstood. It's kind of weird because I get the same CIDs. I added debug prints in the codec. Nothing is failing. There are no errors. So I still have no clue why tests are failing. And the tests that are failing are giving me very useful error messages like failure, nil, or like failure not found, stuff like that. So it's very fun to debug. And yeah, that's me. I wish I could tell you what's wrong, but I think it's going to take me like another day or so to figure out what's wrong. But if anybody has any thoughts, I would love to hear them.
Thanks. I can only tell that on JavaScript I also had those like not found errors, and like, okay, yeah. So it's the same on the JavaScript side as well. Great. So next is Eric.
So I'm still in the trenches on trying to upstream some stuff from a couple of weeks ago already into Go multi-hash, and surely it's close to landing now. We're going to have a nice plug-in-ish registration-y system so you can add multi-hashes to the multi-hash library without having to like patch the library itself. And you'll be able to get hashes out and they'll stream and all this stuff. And I'm pretty sure I talked about the why in the last week's recording, so I won't do that again. But there's a PR. We've fought through what seems like hundreds of small details in that PR already, and I think there's 4 left, and surely they will be done in a day or so. After that, the link system PR is still out, and it was pretty much just chilling out waiting for that multi-hash stuff. So I'm going to revisit that as soon as we can merge the multi-hash changes, and it'll just remove a bunch of code from that PR mostly, and then we can go ahead with that. And none of the APIs will really change. And then we've started having one other discussion in the last week that's probably going to cause a very rapid fire follow-up to the link system PR, which is a discussion about if we want to have some API to let storage functions say if they should be trusted. So basically, if you're reading things, sometimes you have a storage pool where if you have total control of the storage pool and you trust that you're the only one that can touch it and so on and so forth, and you've put data into that storage pool and you hashed it at the time, then should we be able to read that out and deserialize it and not bother hashing it? Maybe sometimes that's actually reasonable. Right now, we just don't have an API for that. You always check the hash when you load things. But if you're really sure that that's duplicate work, then like, okay, maybe we should be able to avoid that. So the question is, where should we put that API? There's more than one possible thought on that, and there's a PR with one option on it, and there's some other discussion on that PR of other ways we could do it. So if anyone's interested in that, you can take a peek. And yeah, Chris is cool. Yeah, I think to give a quick rundown of what the options are is we're considering having like one big flag for the entire link system. Like, okay, if you're dealing with this whole thing, then don't check things. Or if we should complicate the API of the storage functions to let them say whether they should be trusted. It's just kind of deciding like who should have this responsibility.
Next one is Will.
Cool. I got busy with a bunch of Filecoin issues debugging last week, so not quite as much, but I figured I would update some of the other IPLD related things that the group of us looking at IPLD and IPFS got through last week. There's a IPLD prime Git codec that now passes all of the round trip tests. Like it can make IPLD nodes off of all of the Git subtree within its own repository and then reserialize them, and they end up as the same SHA-1 hashes and objects as they started out with, which is nice. The interfaces that are coming for thinking about what fetching IPFS objects in a IPLD prime native dialect looks like is that interface refined some last week. You can take a look at what it is now, but I think it's actually a much more easy to use ergonomic interface. It just has a callback instead of 2 channels, and this makes life somewhat easier in terms of trying to understand who's in charge of closing channels and why are there 2 channels, and etc. The other exciting thing, I think it was like on Friday, Hannah was able to get together a Go Unix FS node, IPLD prime representation ADL of what a Unix FS node looks like, which is exciting because that gets us another step towards having sort of a bunch of these mutation type things, or this is especially used for pathing because that's the view of your data that you want when you're trying to do various traversal and pathing style things. So things are falling into place there. I think that's it for me.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Sure.
Yeah, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Okay. So the actual data is in some sense DAG PB data, right? So you've got these things with links, but when we talk about the paths that we want, the paths that we have are going to be based off of IPFS, off of UnixFS paths, and which thinks of them as maps with like name to subchild of directory, right? And if we just have DAG PB data, which is probably the codec that we initially would want to load this data out of blocks as, we don't know how to path over it that way. So we need to interpret it as UnixFS. And what we currently have in the IPLD format version of IPFS is we have this sort of extension where we take our sort of view of a DAG PB protobuf, and we have this other protobuf thing that we call a file system node that is the UnixFS sort of view. And then we have this custom sort of pathing logic that's like, oh, when you want to think of me as the map, I will expose my directories if I'm a directory, and sort of looks in it and does some special casing stuff. So we need some equivalent of that in IPLD prime to be able to still have the ability to do this seemingly natural thing of walking a directory tree, which is the thing that we do all the time. And so the question is, how does that work, right? And I think we're still figuring out exactly how that works, because we've got, the DAG PB node that is the thing that we are loading out of disk, but then we also have this UnixFS node that is the thing we want to interact with for pathing style things. And so is the deal that we're going to do an ADL-like thing? Are we going to just sort of wrap it when we do the pathing and get the back? Are we going to have one thing that is some horrible hybrid amalgamation of both of these things, or something else? So that repo is a first pass. It will likely evolve in terms of what that actually means in terms of how we do those duality of these two things as it meets actual code and utilization that forces, us to figure out the path of least resistance. So I don't have all the answers, but I have an implementation of some code.
Code it first, test it later. No, it's cool. Thanks.
All right, next one is Rod.
Hang on, can I tag a little more information onto that one before we move on?
Yeah, sure.
We've also had some really outlandish ideas in the last week. Okay, I'm calling it outlandish. It's my idea, and I think it's outlandish. So, we just talked about how we're looking at using the ADL concept to redefine the way that we're doing this UnixFS stuff in a much simpler, more coherent way, we hope. So some of the responsibilities that we might expect that to take on is like the translation from the low-level DAG PB codec content to how we want to path over it. And some of it will probably be taking care of the directory sharding, ham-dish thing, whatever's going on there. And in taking care of those things, it does a bunch of the work. But something else that's interesting about UnixFS is that it's got, when you're walking over the directories, you've got these hamp-like things. And then you've also got a bunch of attributes. And then you've got the jump over to the next content. So that means actually when you're doing the pathing in IPFS, like over the wherever your address is /IPFS/files path here thing, if you chunk that all up, each one of those segments is doing several things. It's jumping up through the hamp. And so that's something we might do with this ADL. And then it's doing the additional like DAG PB semantic translation thing. And then it's stepping through the little attribute structure, and then it's going forward. So the outlandish idea this week is maybe we can actually represent all of these things with two ADLs that look at the same data. And one of them could just jump you through the hamp, and then it gives you the entries with the metadata. And then another one could do the hamp jump and jump past the metadata and give you the next full node. The second one would be interesting because that would actually give you all the way IPFS style pathing with no additional magic. And then you could choose.
So that second one is what this prototype is.
It's jumping all the way. Yeah, okay.
I believe so.
But you might want both, because if you want to like get off the ride slightly earlier and see the metadata, then you do so. We'll see how that goes. Finn.
Thanks. Next one is Rod.
Mine's simple. I'm trying to help get some. This is ultimately about getting some TypeScript work landed in the JS IPFS stuff, and part of that, Volker is doing some integration of our newer IPLD JavaScript components over there, and there's just stuff going on with that are sort of in that area, and it means consuming some of our newer pieces, but there's compatibility issues, and we knew this would be a problem because it's part of this ES modules migration that the JavaScript ecosystem is undergoing, where we have tried with our new stuff to straddle that line much more intentionally and be much more future looking with it, but we're still in the middle of pain with it. And so we've gone one path, but the IPFS team with the edgier tools that they use for all the things, their testing and bundling and everything, have chosen to use this tool called ESBuild, which is a Go JavaScript compile thing, and it doesn't support export maps for ES modules, and we rely on export maps to solve all our problems in the ES modules area. So our new stuff doesn't work with like the rest of the PL JavaScript stack. So we're just trying to address that, and it's just a big whack-a-mole game. And we knew this would be the case because you fix it for one bundler, and then another bundler breaks. So I thought I had a solution last week, merged it in yesterday, tried it out. And it wasn't a bundler that broke, it was actually the TypeScript compiler that broke. So fixed one thing and the TypeScript compiler broke. But I think we've got a path to, fixing that one, but who knows what else will pop up. So it might be a case of we'll get this fixed and then someone will report, hey, this is now broken in my, who knows what tool chain that they're using. It's a bit of chaos, but we'll move forward internally and see what breaks out externally. That's all.
I didn't say that I really like ESBuild for what that's worth. Modulo, apparently, whatever issues you're having with it.
Yeah, so one comment I forgot to post on the issue that if you want someone to test it with CommonJS, because like what I currently, as I currently do JS IPFS work, I can test it because I actually do those things. So I wanted to do it today, but forgot about it. But
I would really like that. So what I'm gonna, I think, because of the way Michael's set up publishing for these things, I can't actually publish pre-releases for them because Michael has the keys and everything's published through GitHub Actions, and there's no way to do like a pre-release. But I think what I'll do is I'll get a solution that I think works, actually just published, of JS multi-formats, and then throw it over to you to test on CommonJS, because that is the missing piece of the test coverage we really need. Is this consumable through classic CommonJS consumption with the TypeScript integration, and JS IPFS is the place where that all comes together.
Yeah, I can also, I guess I can also just point you, if you like, to because I have a PR for Unix FS, which should do the trick, basically, to just basically take this PR, check it out, compile it, and see if it works, I think.
Oh, great. Okay.
But I can,
cool.
Yeah, we can catch up after the call. Yeah. Cool. Let's see. Anything else? Oh, I have some notes down there from someone that we have plenty of repositories. Who wants to comment on this one?
Yeah, this is just a fun fact that I wanted to make available. Somebody else working within the entirety of all of this stuff that Protocol Lab supports, so like all the IPFS, all the IPLD, all the libp2p, all the other things, tried to just do a summary and an exploration of like, how many repos are there across all of these orgs that all these people are contributing to? And the answer is in the hundreds. It's not even in the low hundreds. It's like 770-ish. And then I think we discovered a whole nother organization that wasn't actually fully counted under that report. So it's probably 800 or 900 or maybe more.
Multi-formats too.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that one was in there. But yes, big numbers. So
I was looking in our org recently and still discovering repos that I was like, oh, they're not on my mental stack at all.
Yep.
But I think collectively, like even this group, we could identify things in the IPLD org that we want just to archive or deprecate. So if Stewards is coming up with a strategy for how to do that, I think we could pretty quickly make that happen across the IPLD org. It's just that we don't have a strategy right now, so they're just in limbo.
Yep. So that is a
Are you going
conversation
into the? Are you going into the repos that are in people's personal accounts that are heavily depended on?
No,
Yeah,
I don't think we are. Not in the first round of analysis. It's a good point, though.
This never happens in our stack.
Yeah, that CBG gen really a missing piece. I think there are surprising numbers of heavily relied upon repos in varying states of disrepair that are still in people's personal accounts that are worth considering.
Watching Lotus compile and seeing the Go dependencies and the Rust dependencies and all the usernames come up is fascinating because like Juan's in there. So
yep, I was going to say the Go mod of Lotus is actually very, very interesting reading.
Cool.
Didn't mean to give you more work.
No, that's actually a really good observation. You're right. There are some things with my name on it that's in the transitive depths. There are some Rod things that I know are in our transitive depths in various places. There's some Juan things. Like there are plenty of people name things. Yep.
Cool. Is there anything else people want to chat about or have comments? No. Cool. Then
I was a little bit interested. I didn't quite catch the details today, and I haven't really figured it out from the GitHub traffic about the link system stuff, like the hold up on link system and Go multi-hash. You mentioned it, Eric, but there seems to be, is it a conflict or just a priority problem or a speed problem? What's going on here between you, Eric, and Will's team, and is that on path to be resolved?
So the link system stuff I wished it would have been done a while ago, but in the process of trying to straighten that out, I drafted that whole thing assuming that the Go multi-hash library was going to let me get a standard library hash with this interface that's been in the Go standard library since literally forever. And I found that it doesn't. And that actually really screwed with the abstractions. And so at first I just absolutely bulldozed my way through it. And I was like, I'm going to replace this entire thing with a simple map from magic number to hash and it'll be fine. And I did, and it was fine mostly. But some discussion ensued and we collectively decided that we didn't want to have a second system of that. And so we're going to try to upstream all of that stuff into the Go multi-hash repo immediately. Perhaps
okay, so it
unsurprisingly,
created a transient dependency.
Well, so when we tried to upstream things, we discovered more things in that repo because that's one of our half the commits are from 7 years ago sorts of repositories. And it's just things are being improved. Maybe some of them aren't things that we necessarily would have prioritized if we were more careful about scope expansion. It's getting there now.
Okay. It's complicated though.
there are a lot of interesting things. Like every time I think anyone in this team has discussed anything about multi-formats, we're kind of surprised at how quickly it gets out of hand, right? Like those magic numbers, they just... So some of the stuff in Go multi-hash is like, oh yeah, we have a function that checks if this magic number is the right magic number. Like, is this one that we know to be a multi-hash? Well, what does that mean? Does that mean it has a constant in this repo? Does it mean it has a constant in the CSV file over there? Does it mean we have an implementation registered for it? And some of this code that's like 7 years old just didn't make a distinction between which of those things we might be concerned about. And now as I try to implement this registry system that actually lets you register things on the fly and like not have infinite transit dependencies all the time, now that distinction actually becomes apparent in a way that it wasn't before. And so some of these old abstractions are just like, suddenly we have to ask, what is this thing supposed to mean? And does it actually provide value? And when you ask, does this provide value of a function that's been around for 7 years and nobody's ever questioned it? Well, you know, it doesn't matter whether the answer is yes or no. The question is tetchy no matter what.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's
Multi-formats
also
is
just the stepping up to a meta level. It's this figuring out the reality of the tension of what is it that, you know, like if product wants a prototype of something in 3 weeks, and the reality is we're just like, it's tough to merge stuff and actually do good release management, and there's just different timelines for things, and we're going to have to figure out how we balance those and how we talk about that. And I think, you know, we'll be able to point back to that at some point of like, you know, is the reality that as we identify these things that we need to have projects that we can flip back and forth between to pick up unblocked threads. I think we've been lucky that for this IPLD and IPFS one, there's enough different things that were not blocked. Like there are other pieces that need to happen. But especially for smaller scope things, as we end up in there, I think it's very reasonable to say, okay, so, you know, we did the engineering work, but now we need to expect 2 or 3 weeks to get this through steward review, which is, you know, 10% the author's time answering comments, but is just, you know, a workload thing. And so how do we talk about that when we're talking about the 3 weeks that a project takes? So I think there will be iteration on figuring out what that means. But right. I'm not unhappy that this came up in the beginning as a thing that we then go back and point to of like, okay, what does unblocked mean?
Yeah, especially when you come to something like multi-formats, that really is one of the biggest things here where there's such a conflict of visions, but also a lack of clarity about the whole thing. And so once you start touching into that, then it's probably not surprising that you come away a little bit burnt and needing to go deeper. And that's probably really good that we have a stewards team that can own it as a larger collective, I think. And I hope that's working out well, Eric, that you have other people to lean on to get that resolved.
Getting consensus is probably pretty easy, right?
That's got to be a joke.
All right. I guess if there's nothing else, then I close the meeting and goodbye everyone, and see you all again next week.